another Thunder Thursday Hangout here from the Opubco Studios. I'm Jenni Carlson, joined by a smidge of our Thunder coverage team. We'll get to him in just a minute, but first we want to tell you that Thunder Thursdays are brought to you by Wheeler Chevrolet. Head down I-40 and save yourself some money at Wheeler Chevrolet. The smidge of our coverage team that joins us is Darnell Mayberry, but he's a big smidge. Got a lot going on. How you doing, Darnell?
Pretty good, Jenny.
All right, great to hear. Lots going on, obviously, in the aftermath of the draft, now that free agency is opening. But let's start with the news of the day, Darnell, and that's Sebastian Telfair. Sounds like he's going to be coming to Oklahoma City as that third point guard. How did all of this happen, and what's your feeling about his addition to the Thunder?
Well, it started, I think, last year when the Thunder showed interest in Sebastian. It didn't work out. Derek Fisher came back to be that third point guard. But then Fisher moved on. He retired from playing and went to go coach the Knicks, obviously. So they needed a veteran presence there. They needed someone with a steady hand and someone who could add depth at that position. It's not a big deal. He's probably not going to play a whole lot behind Russell Westbrook and Reggie Jackson. So, all the fans out there who are filling up my Twitter timeline, panicking, saying this isn't the move they needed, relax. It's a third point guard. Guy's not going to play much. He's not making much money. In fact, USA Today reported it's a non-guaranteed deal. I don't think that's going to matter much just because I think he's making the roster and they're going to pay him. But, it's not a huge acquisition. He's a guy who's going to come in and just be a cheap addition to the roster at a position that they needed to fill.
A stopgap, it sounds like, Darnell, because as you say, Russell Westbrook obviously in that starting spot, Reggie Jackson right now with the reserve bunch. I guess this begs the question, though, if there's some thought about Reggie Jackson potentially moving into a starting role and Sebastian Telfair is the guy that they signed for that third point guard spot, doesn't seem like he's a guy that's likely to be that number two guy. So does this sort of indicate maybe it's not Reggie Jackson in the starting five?
Well, the Thunder can go a lot of different ways with it, and Scott Brooks is going to have to make the final call on all of it. Obviously, you got Reggie Jackson, who's capable of being a starter. A lot of people don't want to see him as a starter, and I don't think the Thunder wants him to start. So I think he's going to continue to come off the bench and really just play a lot of minutes with Russell Westbrook in two-guard lineups, maybe even three-guard lineups at times with Jeremy Lamb in there. But the Thunder can go a lot of different ways with it. I just don't see Reggie Jackson starting next year.
We're also joined by another member of our Thunder coverage team, that being Anthony Slater. Anthony, how's it going? Oh, Anthony is muted. Speaking in with his hands. We're going to have to lip read here a second. Okay, not yet. Oh,
can you hear me?
There he is. There's Anthony. How's it going?
Oh, good. I'm hoping you've already given Darnell some crap for that employee of the month back there.
Hey, that's so long ago. You two sharing? Are you sharing that parking spot? Okay.
He's not sharing the love right now. He's acting like it's all him back there.
I got this beautiful sign. What am I supposed to do with it? I figured I might as well add it to the Hangout.
I think it's pretty cool, Darnell.
Humble brag right there.
That's not even humble. There's no humble there at all.
You're right. Just
no, there's no humbleness there.
That's humbleness in the let me tell you how humble I am area. So talking about the Sebastian Telfair acquisition, Anthony, is this, I know there's been a lot of Thunder fans saying, I don't know about this. What are your thoughts? What do you say to those Thunder fans that are a little bit scratching heads over the acquisition of Sebastian Telfair?
It's come out that it's non-guaranteed. It's a lot like the Ryan Gomes signing last season. Didn't really end up mattering. Ryan Gomes was on the team for 15, 20 games. Didn't really play. I think it's just a flyer on a guy that's got a lot of talent. Obviously, he scored 26 points per game last year. It was obviously in China. I don't think that'll translate. But, maybe he can come in and provide a spark. And if he can't, they're not constricted to this deal. They can cut ties in the preseason. And it's not anything that'll bind them free agency-wise because it's a veteran minimum contract. So, I don't necessarily love the signing, but I don't, hate it either.
Yeah. Well, obviously, it's got some people talking, but not nearly as much as the news that percolated up last night, which was Paul Gasol is not only looking at the Thunder as a spot to land in free agency, but the Thunder has emerged as the front runner. And Darnell, you wrote a little bit about this for the paper and the website today, just about the likelihood of all of this. As you said, it's not a slam dunk sort of deal, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. And a few days ago, it sure felt that way. What has changed? What's happened in the last couple days with this whole situation?
Well, according to ESPN.com, Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook went out there, or they were in LA, and met with Pau Gasol face to face and pitched him on joining the Thunder. So, you obviously have your two superstars who are campaigning on their team's behalf to try to get Gasol here in a Thunder uniform. But I think just the fact that the Thunder has some creative ways that they can go about this. They don't have to necessarily just sign him, which I think everyone assumed originally. They only have $5.3 million to spend, and that's the mid-level exception. Pau Gasol made $19.3 million last year, so we're talking about a $14 million pay cut if the Thunder sign him outright. But the Thunder can agree to a sign-and trade with the Los Angeles Lakers, and if that happens, then Pau Gasol can make a lot more money to join the Thunder and get his wishes of playing with a contender and competing for a championship. So it works for all parties. The Lakers could get something back as opposed to losing Pau Gasol outright in free agency. The Thunder gets one of the most skilled big men in the game. Even though he's aging, he's still one of the best big men in the league. And Pau Gasol gets his money and he gets to play for a contender. So when you put all those pieces together, you just realize that this thing could have some legs to it.
Okay, Anthony, talk us through this a little bit more, because obviously if Pau Gasol comes to Oklahoma City, Kendrick Perkins is probably the odd man out. How does that work? And if you put Pau Gasol in that starting lineup, what does that look like? He's not maybe the rim protector, but he's obviously more offensive minded. Talk us through sort of the Pau for Perk, Perk for Pau situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's not the post defender, but I mean, you got Serge Ibaka next to him. He's never played with a rim protector next to him like Serge Ibaka. You have Steven Adams, who's he'll be itching for minutes still, and you can keep him coming off the bench for some energy, stuff like that. I think it would work beautifully, especially offensively. Think about how skilled that front line would be. You got Kevin Durant, Serge Ibaka, Pau Gasol. Pau Gasol, an incredible passer for how big he is. I think it's a beautiful fit, and I think the reason why it's got to this point where people are labeling the Thunder front runners is I think Pau Gasol identified how good a fit it would be. It was leaking out from his camp before the free agency even started that he wanted to meet with the Thunder. He sees the Thunder. He's always kind of complimented the Thunder, their style of play. I think he kind of pushed this to the point where the Thunder were like, hey, maybe we do have a shot, and then went after him, and that's why I think it's got to where it is. And I think it's something the Thunder should be number one on their to-do list.
Yeah, it's a little bit surprising that you would say that, because I think so many of us thought that free agency was going to be all about guards, going to be about getting that third point guard, about getting shooting guards, which we'll get to in a minute. But this is the kind of opportunity that I'm not sure a lot of people thought the Thunder would be looking at. Was the Thunder expecting it? Darnell, is this sort of a bolt from the blue situation?
Yeah, Sam Presti always talks about exploring all his options, and I think this is one of those situations where, he might not have known how realistic it was going in, but I think it's probably definitely something that was on his radar. Pau Gasol, I did a thing for Monday's paper ranking the tiers of free agents, and Pau Gasol was in that first tier, I believe. I might have had him in that second tier, but he's one of the best free agents in available this summer. So it's something that I think the Thunder was always going to look at, but then, as Pau Gasol probably expressed more interest, and things probably grew from there. But I think it definitely is realistic now, especially when you consider that there are ways that they can get him without him having to take a massive pay cut, without him joining a team with Kendrick Perkins, without the Thunder having to go into the tax to get him. It just makes sense on so many levels when you really think about it. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but it's certainly something that has the potential of happening, especially if Pau Gasol is sold on doing some things with his contract that could make it work.
Well, it's odd because I was going back and looking at some stuff, guys, and it wasn't too long ago that there were reports out that part of the Lakers group that was going to be sort of put into action to try to convince Carmelo Anthony to become a Laker included Pau Gasol. And now, obviously, that isn't going to happen, I wouldn't think, for crying out loud. They're going to be trying to retain him for their team. And Anthony, if he ends up in Oklahoma City, my suspicion is most of the pundits out there will automatically move the Thunder to the top of the West. Should they? Is that where the Thunder would rightfully belong with a guy like Pau Gasol in the lineup?
Yeah, I mean, he's so good, and he would add so much offensively, a low post threat that they've never had, a great passer out of that position. It would be a great move, but, I mean, he's been injured the last few years. He had, big-time injury problems last year. You kind of worry about that. The Spurs are still the Spurs. I mean, the last time we saw them, they looked about as good as I've seen a basketball team. So, I mean, I wouldn't just automatically say West favorites, NBA favorites. You got to see where LeBron goes this summer because, wherever he goes, they're going to be obviously a contender. But it would be a huge boost to the Thunder. There's no doubt.
All right, guys. Well, we can talk more about that as we go, but let's diverge a little bit more. And as I mentioned, the thought was that this free agency period was going to be largely about guards for this franchise. And we've seen the acquisition of Sebastian Telfair, which won't be announced, to my understanding, until about July 10th. Teams can't do that until then, but he is not a shooting guard. He's not that guy that's a knockdown shooter from outside. So there's been pictures that put Mike Miller and Kevin Durant in the same spot. Is Mike Miller that guy, Darnell? Is he who they're targeting now for that shooting guard spot?
I can't see him coming in as a starter. I can see the Thunder trying to make a run at him, especially if they get Pau Gasol. I mean, the two, and I wrote about this today, the two played together in Memphis for 5 years. They're former teammates, they're friends, they share the same agent. So this could be a package deal almost. There are reports out of Memphis that Mike Miller, although he has expressed his desire to go back to Memphis, the Grizzlies aren't offering what he's looking for. And if the Thunder does the deal that I kind of broke down today, they could still have money left over to get Pau Gasol, Mike Miller. So, I think it's definitely possible that they're targeting Mike Miller as well as Pau Gasol, but I can't see Mike Miller stepping into the starting shooting guard role simply because, he's not a great defender. They prefer to have a solid defender in that spot to take some pressure off of Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. And if they don't have that, then I think you're risking your entire defense, your defensive identity going out of the window with the loss of Thabo Sefolosha and potentially Kendrick Perkins. Then you got 5 guys who aren't really committed to defense in there, except 4. You got Serge Ibaka, who's a potential Defensive Player of the Year candidate, but I can't see Mike Miller starting. I think he'd be more of a guy coming off the bench to add some shooting and some depth.
So, how about that offensive lineup though, potentially closing a playoff game if you went Russell Westbrook, Mike Miller, Kevin Durant, Serge Ibaka, Pau Gasol? I mean, that would be an offensive juggernaut.
Yeah, and we've seen what Mike Miller can do in big-time playoff games. The Thunder remembers when he was with the Heat a couple years ago and had a couple big games in those NBA Finals. And, I think a lot of people, Anthony, when people saw Mike Miller at that point in his career, they thought surely he can't have too many more years in his legs, in his knees. Then he goes to Memphis, returns to a team that he'd been with before, seems to almost be rejuvenated, as Darnell said, not a starter, a guy that plays reserve minutes, but played a lot of games, a lot more minutes than I ever thought he would play last year. Even in a reserve role, it seems like he might bring more to the table than maybe we even expected a couple years ago.
Yeah, you mentioned that. There was actually columns and stories after Game 5. Remember, I think he hits, 6, 7 threes in that game. There was columns and stories about him, limping into the interview room, and his back was out, and his knees were shot. And there was people saying, they thought it was his last game. They thought he was going to retire. Goes to the offseason, gets a bunch of surgeries, eventually lands in Memphis, and, rejuvenates his career. Like you said, he played 82 games last season, all 82, the only guy on the Grizzlies to do it. I think Steven Adams was the only guy on the Thunder to play all 82 games. So, I mean, I think he'd be a fantastic fit. 46% three-point shooter. We know how badly this team needs three-point shooting. I think the Thunder know how great a fit it is. It's all just, can they pry him away from Memphis? And it'll be tough because he keeps saying he wants to stay in Memphis.
Yeah, I want to remind everybody they're watching Thunder Thursdays before we keep talking about free agency. A lot to talk about here, but they're watching Thunder Thursdays, and we're brought to you by Wheeler Chevrolet. Head out I-40 and save yourself some money at Wheeler Chevrolet. And folks can join us and ask questions about targets in free agency, about the draft picks that we saw the Thunder take last week, about the upcoming Summer League, which we'll get to in just a minute. Go to newsok.com and go to the sports page, then link up with our live page, newsok.com/live. We've been having a little bit of technical difficulties, but if you go through the sports page, go onto the live page, you can join us in the chat area there and ask some questions to Darnell and Anthony. And we do have just a couple out there, guys. One relating to Paul Gasol and how many games he played last year. What was his game total last year? Obviously, injuries have become an issue with him. And is that a concern? Darnell, let's start with you because the Thunder they've sort of been risk averse when it comes to the injury thing. Although we saw that change with Mitch McGary, who played only 8 games for Michigan before the Thunder drafted him. Is the injury issue a concern at all with Paul Gasol?
He played 60 last year, 42 the year before.
There
just
you
so
go.
You guys know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's much of a concern. Nobody really plays all 82 games. He did have some pretty significant injuries the last 2 years. And at 34, I guess he'll be 34 later this month, or actually in a couple days. So his age is catching up with him a little bit, but I don't think the injury history is that significant to where it'll stop you or prevent you or even give you a reason for hesitation for doing this deal if it's out there. He's so skilled. He's so much of an upgrade from Kendrick Perkins that I just don't think it's something that you can pass up just because he's had a little bit of bad luck the last 2 years. And frankly, that situation in LA wasn't the greatest for him. Who knows how much of that was legitimate injuries and just Powell just saying, you know what, I'm not playing for Mike D'Antoni, which, you could take another way and say, why would you want a player that does something like that? But, I'm not saying he did, but it wasn't a great situation for Powell out in Los Angeles the last couple of years.
Some of it was, the Lakers were cool with him sitting out. They were cool with people sitting out because, they were kind of trying to lose last year, especially late in the season. So like he said, you don't know how serious those injuries actually were.
Yeah, and I'm sure the Thunder will be looking pretty seriously at that. Obviously, we know that a deal with Tyson Chandler was cut when they had concerns about his foot. Obviously, the surgery that he ultimately had, a risky surgery, went very well. He's still playing, still very good, so that didn't work out. But I think the Thunder will definitely, if there's reason to look into it, they'll be looking into it with Paul Gasol. But a big man who's still productive, definitely intriguing to the Thunder. All right, guys, we sort of nibbled around about shooting guard and talking about Mike Miller, but Mike Miller, like we're talking, more of a reserve guy, a spot guy when it comes to duty. Starting shooting guard is not going to be Thabo Sefolosha. That is almost assured. He met with the Wizards earlier this week. He's talking to different teams in free agency, likely not to be back with the Thunder. What does the Thunder do at shooting guard? Anthony, what's your best guess right now?
My best guess is they'll probably start, one of the incumbents like Robertson or Jeremy Lamb. I'm going to guess Jeremy Lamb. He's more advanced. He'll probably get more minutes. But there's a shot at Andre Robertson. I think actually a very realistic shot because, as Darnell mentioned earlier, they like to have defense out there in that starting lineup at tip. They like to, make sure opposing teams, their star perimeter players, they don't get going because, I think Stan Presti always says, once somebody gets going, you usually can't turn it off. So there's a good chance it's Andre Robertson, and then maybe, if you put Jeremy Lamb in, and if he gets hot, he plays big minutes. There's going to play a lot of Russell Westbrook, Reggie Jackson together. So he may not start at the 2 guard, but he'll get a lot of minutes there. There's a lot of different ways they can go, and then we also got to see what they do in this free agency.
Well, Darnell, is the Robertson option the way to go, or do you see this going down a different way at the shooting guard spot?
If I'm Scott Brooks, I'm starting Jeremy Lamb. All this desire and demand for a defensive-minded 2 guard in there, I don't think that it's that vital. Slater just brought up a great point earlier. If they got Mike Miller and Pau Gasol, there's a good chance that you're going to end the games with Russell Westbrook, Mike Miller, Kevin Durant, Serge Ibaka, and Pau Gasol. So if you end the game with an offensive-minded lineup, why can't you start the game with an offensive-minded lineup? Some things in basketball, the traditional ways of doing things, I just don't understand why some coaches are so stuck on doing things a certain way, and GMs for that matter. I understand that, you want to set the tone defensively, but give Jeremy Lamb a chance. He's shown that he's a willing defender. He's not the best defender. He sometimes gets beat. He's sometimes out of place. But he's still only essentially in his second year. He's going into his second year, essentially. He didn't play much as a rookie. He finally got some minutes last year. Throw him out there. Let him see how he can develop as the season goes on. I would start Jeremy Lamb. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be Reggie Jackson, like I said. If they give Mike Miller or if they don't do anything else, I think it's going to be Andre Robertson.
Darnell, you've often touted C.J. Miles as a shooting guard that you wish the Thunder would acquire in free agency.
The man who got away.
So what's the next best free agent option in your mind?
In my mind, it's someone else. In Slater's mind, it's Mike Miller. He wants Mike Miller. He's all over Mike Miller. He's like Mike Miller's agent over
Max deal. Throw the max deal at him. He's worth it.
There's not many great options out there. You're seeing some of these guys like Jody Meeks, Ben Gordon get sort of insane deals for the caliber of player that they are. So, Sam Presti wouldn't be he wouldn't be foolish if he just sat out and said, you know what, we're fine with what we have. And I'd rather see Andre Robertson in the starting lineup than see the Thunder go out there and overpay someone like a Jody Meeks, who just got $19 million from the Pistons. By the way, the Pistons have a way of just blowing money like almost every offseason. I don't understand what they're doing up there. They got new leadership with Stan Van Gundy and our old friend Jeff Bauer, of all people. And they still just find a way to just throw bad contracts at guys all the time. So I don't want to see the Thunder do that. I'd rather them just go with Andre Robertson and see if he can develop. I talked about Lamb's potential development. See if Andre Robertson can develop. But he needs to learn how to shoot. He's got to make some three-point shots so the defenses can't sag off of him. I don't care how good defensively he is. He's going to have to make some shots.
Hey, breaking news on the podcast. Real GM reporting that Thabo Sefolosha has agreed to a 3-year deal with the Atlanta Hawks. Interesting.
All right. So Thabo Sefolosha, if that's true, definitely off the board. Now the starting shooting guard spot is definitely open. Anthony, make your pitch for who you'd like to see brought in to fill that role in free agency.
If you don't get Mike Miller, which, like I've said, it should be option 1, 2, and 3. I think you got to have a shooter, not necessarily a starter. But I think they need another shooter on this team. I think Anthony Morrow's sitting out there. He's probably not going to command too much money. It's strictly pretty much his only skill is shooting. That's a good guy to have coming off the bench. I think he hit something around 44% from 3 last year. So I think he's the guy to go after if you don't get Mike Miller.
Okay, guys.
Hey, by the way, Jenni, $12 million for Thabo Sefolosha over those 3 years. We're not sure how it's structured. Maybe the final year is not guaranteed or a team option, something like that. But that's $4 million a year for Thabo Sefolosha. I'm not sure how Thunder fans would have felt about that, bringing him back at that number.
Right. Good point, Darnell. Okay, guys, we're close to the end of our Thunder Thursday Hangout, but I want to get to a few more questions from our live page. Before we wrap up talking about the Summer League, I want to remind people, though, that we're brought to you by Wheeler Chevrolet. Head out I-40 and save yourself some money at Wheeler Chevrolet. Some questions on the newsok.com/live page that, again, talking about Paul Gasol. But, guys, I want to get your thoughts on a couple of these. Defensively, the question from one of the guests on the chat is, how does Paul Gasol fit with the Thunder defensively? Anthony, what are your thoughts about that?
He's not a great defender, obviously. But you have a Serge Ibaka who, as we've seen, kind of erases mistakes. You got Steven Adams coming off the bench who's emerging as a shot blocker, a guy that, could play some solid post defense. We know Nick Carlson can do some things. You may take the step you take down defensively from Perk to Pau Gasol is way more minor than the major upgrade you take offensively. So even though, you lose a little bit there, it's a move you have to make.
All right, Darnell, we ask a defensive question to Anthony. Here's an offensive question coming from the live chat. Mac asking about Gasol and his numbers last season, 17 points, 10 rebounds, but bringing up the point that Gasol wouldn't get as many touches with the Thunder, with KD and Russell, as he did with the Lakers last year. So what are some realistic numbers that you could see Gasol putting up in the Thunder offense?
I could see him averaging 15 points. He'll come down a little bit from that 17 and a half, but I could see him easily averaging 15. He might not be the go-to guy on the block where you just throw it to him and get out of the way, but I think you can do it enough to where he's going to get his touches, and he's also going to get offensive rebounds, putbacks, things like that. Just from his size, his length, he's going to be around the basket and be able to make an impact. And he's a really good free throw shooter. He can step out and hit the pick and pop, just sort of like Serge Ibaka. He can hit the mid-range jump shot. So, I think there's plenty of ways to get him involved and get him his touches where you're not just dumping it to him on the block. So that's one thing that I'm really not as concerned about. The defensive end is probably the bigger concern, and how the Thunder is going to continue to guard people on the low block without Perkins, if this all happens.
A big if, but talking about those numbers for just a second before we get to our third and final question on Gasol in the live chat here. You talk about the numbers he put up last year. Remember too that he was the best option for the Lakers, and he was surrounded by, in large part last season, for a majority of the season, by guys who weren't as nearly offensively skilled as Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and Serge Ibaka. So the defensive pressure that he was under was extreme last season. So for him to have put up those numbers under those conditions, yes, his touches go down, but he's not the guy that defenses can key on like he was last season. Something to think about there offensively as well. Okay, lastly, guys, let's go to this question. The question of Perk and where he fits into this whole thing. Brett asked, if the Lakers don't want Kendrick Perkins and his expiring contract, could Oklahoma City still sign and trade for Gasol and the Lakers get a trade exception? Or would this have to be a 3-team deal? What sort of situation exists with Kendrick Perkins?
You could 3-team deal. You could maybe ship him to a team that's almost even looking to add salary. Philadelphia. Although, man, Kendrick Perkins would not enjoy a season in Philadelphia. But, there's different ways you could do it. If you add some pot sweeteners to the, Lakers, maybe a second-round pick, an exception like you mentioned, even, to get it done, maybe a first-round pick or an overseas, Tibor Pleiss, something like that. There's a lot of ways to do it, but, that Kendrick Perkins contract sitting there, an expiring deal, seems to be an asset that the Thunder would have to or want to move to get Powell.
All right, lastly, before we let you guys go, Darnell, you are headed to Orlando in the not-too-distant future for Summer League games. Yes, it's time for Summer League games. If you've got NBA TV, you're about ready to have live basketball on your TV. And Darnell, talk to us about what you're wanting to see, who you're wanting to see, just storylines that you will really be interested in as Summer League kicks up.
There's so many of them. The Thunder is basically sending his B team down there. It's going to be so many guys who are going to be on the roster, which is rare for Summer League rosters. We're talking Jeremy Lamb, Steven Adams, Mitch McGary, the 21st overall pick. Andre Robertson's going to be down there. Samaje Christian is going to be down there. Grant Jarrett. So all of these guys, a lot of them who were on the team last year and are coming back, are going to have an opportunity to show some improvement this coming week in Orlando. So I look forward to seeing how a lot of these guys develop, not just one guy. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is don't be surprised if guys like Lamb and Steven Adams don't play all 5 games down there. They'll probably play 1 or 2 games, 3 at most probably, but certain guys who are definitely in the rotation are probably not going to play in all the games in Orlando this week.
All right.
Hey, Thunder are building a dynasty down there. They're going for back-to-back. They won it last year. They got to be the favorites heading into this season. I know Darnell's amped up for the Summer League.
I love Summer League.
Anthony, before we go, you're going to be like me. You're going to be watching on TV. Who are you going to be keying on? What guys are you going to be looking at, really paying attention to as this Summer League gets going?
The rookies, Mitch McGary, how much he could play with the back. We haven't seen him really in a year, almost 2 years now, really. He only played 8 games last season. So I'm really interested to see what he does. I want to see what Josh Hustis can do. I've never really seen Hustis play before.
Houston. It's Houston.
The Houston.
Houston.
I've never seen him. And then Samaje Christian, can he, surprise enough to have a chance at a roster spot? He's a guy that maybe him and Sebastian Telford may be battling for one come camp time. There's a lot to watch. And then, of course, I got to see Stone Cold Steve Adams. What is he going to do? MVP of the Summer League, I'm calling it now.
He hosts the MVP trophy. Darnell gets to cover a championship ceremony. It will be great.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys,
Parade
for joining us.
in Bricktown.
And thanks for joining us on the Thunder Thursday Hangout, brought to you by Wheeler Chevrolet. Head down I-40 and save yourself some money at Wheeler Chevrolet. See you guys.